some of the content in here. So we're going to do some different things. So one of the things we're going to differ on is in class we're going to do some hands-on things that we don't do online. Online's going to do some things that you guys don't get to do. So this chapter talks about threats, attacks, and it basically looks at them in terms of endpoints. In other words, those computers at the edge of our computer network. So we want to look at some things that are happening. So there's a term that's called malware, which really just means bad software. So it refers to all different kinds of things. So that malware may be trying to encrypt our files so they can hold them for ransom. It may be trying to launch other programs. It may be allowing remote access, so like a rat program. It may be trying to do all different kinds of ways to cripple our system. So we lump all of those together into that term malware. And, well, maybe I can. Hang on a second. All right, so there's some of them here, and so these are pretty common to see. And I typically hear about these from all different kinds of people. In a lot of cases, this is simply you went to, you typed an extra O when you typed Google, or you went to a wrong website accidentally, or you clicked on a link, and all of a sudden you get this message that, hey, if you don't pay, $1,000 in Bitcoin, we're going to send the police after you. Well, that isn't really likely to happen, but it does mean that something on your system is possibly compromised. Now, the really easy ones of these, I power off my computer and I restart it, but the problem is what they also do typically is save this page as where your browser is going to go to next. So you may have to deal with that issue. Now, some of them do actually start targeting your data. So the one on the right here, this one is really a fake scam to say you've got ransomware so you can pay for a fake product to unlock your computer. Well, that's nice. The one on the left is typically used, and it'll pop up with all different kinds of ones. The FBI. One thing I will note, and it's hard to see on this, but when you see some of these out in the wild, the FBI usually requires a bachelor's, if not a master's degree to get in, and their spelling is a little better and their grammar's a little better than what's in there. So if it looks shady, check it out and be aware that some of those can be harmful. So that's that idea of imprisoning you, so you're locked into something. So the other one is this idea of cryptocurrency or crypto theft, which is happening right now. So this really says we're going to get a file on your computer. We're going to take all of your files, and we haven't done a lot with encryption yet, but what it's going to do is it takes your files and scrambles them. And only the people that are targeting you have the key to unlock those. And so they typically, you won't see a notice until half of your files on your computer are scrambled, for example, and then it'll pop up and say, hey, in 48 hours, I'm going to delete the key, so you need to pay me 10 Bitcoins right now. And that price tends to go up as you get closer to that deadline. There are places not too far from us that have been hit with these in terms of millions of dollars. It has shut down medical care, so these ransomware attacks are tough. One of the problems that we have with them is typically they hide long enough that your backups can even be encrypted so that you don't have an easy way to roll back. And they've gotten much smarter in how they're implementing. Some of these are very much like a corporation in that they have a web page, they'll take money, and their customer service is excellent if you pay the money. They will assist you in getting your files back. Now, here's the problem I have. If somebody's been in my computer and they've encrypted all my files, am I going to ever trust that data or that computer or that connection again? Probably not. So these are very common, and we'll show you some examples here in a second. So this is what one looks like. Hey, if you just give us some money and we'll fix that for you. And they're very helpful. And they'll tell you how to unencrypt your file. Again, it's scary. Where most of these come from, or at least nearly all of the ones I have seen out in the wild that have hit companies that I've been associated with or got asked to take a peek at, almost always they came out of email. So people had gotten an email, and in a lot of the cases it was an email claiming that a FedEx package or something else was on its way and you needed to click on this link to see the shipping content. Now, some of these are a little more targeted because they've done a little research and they see who gets what from different shippers. So it's pretty common, and you go, oh, well, let me click on this link, and oh no. Yeah, it didn't open. And so the other fun thing is then, people will then forward that email to other people in the office and send it out there. So I had one of these a couple of years ago. It came as an email, and it came to one of the managers of the company, and he sent it to everybody in the company saying, I can't get this to open. Can somebody open this and print it for me? Dozens of people in the company. Hey, let's do that. But I could trace this one back. Well, there's other ways, but the best way I could trace this one back was in that particular place there was a executive folder or, C-level folder, and only the managers had access to it. So I knew that it had to start with a manager if they were getting that information. And so all of a sudden it would pop up on their screen that they had 42 days or 42 hours or whatever it was. And so luckily we were able to go back before the infection started. So we had to find out when it infected everything, stop what we were doing, and we were able to replace all those files. They lost a couple days of work, but it could be a lot worse. So that ransomware, and it's growing all the time, so we have to be aware of it and see what's going to happen. So here, for example, in our own state, so law enforcement got involved with Nebraska and Iowa to stop one of these. So Butler County Healthcare and several others. So it's not just companies out in New York or other places. It's around us all the time. And so we see examples of this. So I make less of a distinction among all these different modalities of how things get infected. I'm really looking at the end result. How do I fix it or how do I prevent it? So the book goes in a lot of detail about viruses versus worms. So a virus says, all right, it's going to attach itself to a file if it's a file-based virus. So I go out on the internet and I say, I'm going to download this screensaver, whatever, and it may be a great piece of software, but it has somehow gotten wrapped with a virus in it. So it's got a little extra piece added to it. So there are a lot of different ways. So sometimes they only create an installer, so a very small piece. So you do have to be careful about what sites you're downloading software from. So this is that idea of something called an appender. So in other words, at the very top of the code, it adds a, hey, jump down to here, and then it adds it at the bottom as an appended piece. So this is even more scary. So fileless viruses, the code's directly loaded into memory. So they're persistent. It's hard to control, but easy to infect. And some of these are simple drive-bys. You go to a website and you can actually be infected. A worm then, and really I'm going to argue that a virus really does use a network also to replicate, but firm says, I'm going to get into something and I'm going to try to get into other computers, they're getting far more sophisticated. So typically they're not really deleting files. That was one of the original goals, was people would write these viruses and delete all kinds of information. But now I'm looking at, how do I go in and actually make some money or create some goal outcome? So maybe I want the computers to be remotely controlled. Maybe I want to install a piece where they could be zombie bots and I could use them against cryptography. Maybe I just want to steal your company's secrets, and so I can put things in like that. So we talk about these bots a lot, so you've probably heard of that term. Well, what a bot is means I control your computer. Now, I may not control the screen, I may not control anything else other than I'm getting your computer at some level to do what I want it to do. So maybe I'm doing denial of service attacks, so I'm having your computer send out pings. Maybe I'm having it send out more spam emails, kind of a chain. Maybe I'm working on cryptography or other distributed computer. But it's another way that we can manipulate people. So, one of the interesting pieces that has happened recently, so Kansas City is not that far away. So Kansas City has some server farms. Several of them, obviously. They're a fairly large city. And those server farms have been used for a variety of weird purposes. And a lot of these have been out there. You can get them on the dark web, quote unquote, or you could look at them. So you can say, okay, $500 to Bill over in the Ukraine, and he has all these controls. So now you can put these bots together, and you can attack an entity. Well, it happens not too far from us. So the FBI has actually not too long ago taken over an entire computer complex that was being used to launch bots and control them out of Kansas City. Thanks. Again, not that far from where we are physically, but the best thing is we don't need to be physically present anymore to create havoc. The other thing that we look at, or one of the other things, is we look at, maybe I want to get information about a company, a person, a place, a thing. So spyware is, again, it's another piece of malware. It's somehow employed on your computer. Most commonly, it's done via some of the software you can get that says, hey, I'm adding a little piece of adware in there, or spyware. It may be coming in from an email. It may be, you may put it there deliberately because you think, hey, this ability to put on this gives me prices that are cheaper. So it's tracking software. Sometimes it is with your consent, which is actually a little more frightening. Keyloggers are one of the most invasive. And as a keylogger, so I showed you what the Hack5 group has for keyloggers and some other ones. Well, this is actually just a software piece. Sits on your computer, records everything you type. So passwords. All of those kinds of things can be searched then, because it'll exfiltrate or move that data off of your computer pretty quickly. So other places we've seen it, and I've seen it advertised, you can buy keyloggers because maybe I don't trust my spouse or significant other, and you want to see what all they're doing on their computer. Well, first I'm going to say, if your level of trust is you're going to install spyware on a computer to monitor your other half, probably not a good relationship indicator there. But there are some gray lines in here. So a keylogger, what about if I have children? Is it legal to use that on my children? It can be, and there are some parental controls that will do that. So, and again, it's either a software or in some cases that hardware device. Software is easier to find than the hardware device, quite frankly. The hardware device requires you to look at it a couple of times. You have to be able to figure out a way to get that data out, and then at some point remove this device so you don't get found. But when it's the size of a flash drive, you're not going to notice it on the back of your computer. And I will tell you the best way to put in these kinds of things. Every business, almost, has cleaning teams. Are those cleaning teams well paid? No. $500 tip, do you think you can probably get one of these plugged in on a computer? So, or impersonating a cleaning company and coming in and looking like you're cleaning. You can put these in pretty easily. So, there are two different kinds of models. One of them just stores the data, and so at some point I have to physically retrieve it. So that one is the hardest to catch, because your computer doesn't know there's anything in between that keyboard and the computer. There are models, though, so here's a software version, that even though it's got a hardware module, that it sends that data out off the computer. And there at our firewall or other pieces, we may catch this weird traffic and be able to see it. But if it's strictly a hardware logger, it's pretty tough to find. Another term, pup sounds such like a nice thing. Hey, I'm going to go get a new pup. But what we're looking at is unwanted programs. There are a lot of pieces of software that do a really great job of doing those, but kind of the symbol of these, or the signs you'll see it, if you get on a computer and it's got all kinds of pop-ups on it, so when you go out on the web, all of a sudden you get all these pop-ups for something similar to what you're looking at, or maybe not even very similar. The most recent ones of these I saw were actually, not everybody behaves when they go on the internet. And one of the places you can pick these up is, let's say, the nefarious triple X-rated sites. So all of a sudden it's popping up all over their computer, these pictures and links. And so pop under windows, they go underneath the window you have. They can hijack your search engine. So in other words, when you go to search for something, it goes to a different site than you would normally go to. So these are pretty horrible. Typically they require us to install, and they're kind of tucked into a lot of other software pieces. Say, oh yeah, let's just add this little piece in there. So whenever you install software, always read the boxes and make sure that you're installing the correct thing. So there are places that you're going to run into it that are kind of ugly. So, computer Trojan. So if you go back to the Trojan horse, so this says, hey, I've got a program that's going to do something good for you, but in the middle of it I buried a remote access Trojan, for example. So somebody can get access to a computer without me being on it. So Trojans are again another way we install it. It could do anything under the sun. It's how we look at it. And then we have a couple of other ones that we want to look at. So a backdoor attack. So if I'm a programmer and I'm sitting at Microsoft and I know I'm going to get fired, what if I wrote some code that said, always allow this user in? So somebody could get in a backdoor, or we could open up a port. There's a lot of suggestion that the federal government already requires companies like Microsoft to give them a backdoor into server and operating systems. So it's some way we get anything that isn't a normal chain of command. Logic bomb, so now I know I'm going to get fired, so I'm going to set this program in here, and unless I check in every day or every week, it's going to go in and start deleting all of the files in the file server. So it's some kind of code that we'll have to run out and do that. So typically those are insider attacks, weirdly. And then finally is the worst thing at all. The worst thing of all, something called a rootkit. So a rootkit actually hides underneath your software. Windows doesn't even know it's there. So it hides way deep, and it can alter file drives, records. There are actually a couple of uses that have been horrific with rootkits. Does anybody here like Sony, PlayStations, those kinds of things? Sony Motion Pictures? Well, Sony actually said for a while they were trying to figure out how to do a DVD and make it uncopyable. So you couldn't buy a copy and then distribute it to all your friends because Disney needed to make more money. So what they did was they actually constructed a rootkit. And so when you tried to view this movie the first time on your computer, it would actually install a rootkit and prevent you from doing a lot of different operations. And you never gave consent for that level of intrusion onto your computer. And so they got in some trouble for it, but not a huge amount, because most people didn't understand how far-reaching that kind of attack is. So there are other software pieces now that try to do very similar things, because they want to ensure that they're the only piece of software on that computer, for example. Or they want to make sure that you've legitimately bought a case. So I'm going to skip the checklist here. So crypto malware. So in prison, in other words, typically we encrypt all of our files, all of our folders. So then we have a whole nother list. It just continues on. So if we're running a web server, and most of us are used to now putting in all of our data into a web server instead of storing it locally, well, if I can corrupt that or come up with a way to attack that, for example, cross-site scripting, so we take that and we say, all right, we're going to put a website, it's going to take input, and if it doesn't validate that, maybe we can put a script in instead of just my last name or whatever it's looking for. So sometimes we can also use a valid website as a pass-through. The most common thing we have is something called a SQL injection. So behind the scenes of almost every web page is a database. And those databases typically are built on SQL, or Structured Query Language, or SQL. So a Structured Query Language injection says, oh, where I'm going to put in content, I'm actually going to run a script. So you can find that it is horrifically terrible, and you can do all kinds of things. Find out what all kinds of information is in there. So I'm going to stop temporarily.